Ellie Farrisi on the podcast, live in action. What's going on? Thank you for making the time.
Of course. Below there. How's it going?
Hello there. This is a very special episode, very near and dear to our hearts. I guess this is like the official sort of introductory episode to Bello and what Bello is and why we've teamed up to build Bello.
I'm excited. Let's do
I'm
it.
excited. I'm excited too. So I think a good place to start, Ellie, is who are you? What does the world need to know about you? Um, and how'd you get your start into Web3? And I think we can start with your intro and then introduce Bello. I think that's a good flow.
Yeah, would love
Yeah.
to. So about me, I am a full stack engineer. I've been coding since I was in high school, took my first programming class, then ended up going to school for that. I studied at Temple University in Philadelphia, so I'm from the East Coast originally. During my time at Temple, I had the opportunity to intern and then work part-time at Lockheed Martin, so doing sort of way opposite of Web3 stuff, way more on the government contract work, very bureaucratic and slow paced, but learned a ton, got to work on some pretty important projects. Uh, at that time, though, I decided I was going to take my next role, which was working at Comcast headquarters in Philadelphia, where I went to school. And so at Comcast, I learned a ton of different things: front end, back end, CI/CD, DevOps, all that sort of stuff. Really, great opportunity there, getting to work for a big enterprise and see sort of all this how those systems work. And during school, I kind of always been really passionate about like education and teaching and diversifying computer science. We all know, computer science is not a very diverse field in terms of gender equality, or at least it's getting better, but has a long way to go in my opinion. And so I was trying to do my part to help expand that. And so actually had the opportunity to start a student organ school to teach computer science, and so to local high schools and do workshops and those sort of things. So uh, organize a group of about 35 students to go to different high schools, lead mentorship programs, all that sort of stuff, which was a really amazing opportunity and experience to be able to like oversee so many different amazing, talented individuals. I guess that's kind of also when I got my intro into crypto a little bit, was in like 2017, 2018. I remember everyone talking about like this thing called Bitcoin in my math building. And I was like kind of curious about it, but didn't pay too much attention. But then I had the opportunity to do a semester-long project on emerging technology, and I actually chose blockchain and looked at it more from like the enterprise side, looking at distributed ledgers in general, looking at peer-to-peer networking. Spent the semester really focusing in on that, but I decided to go more of the traditional route post-college, and so I actually took a position with Comcast NBC Universal. I was one of 15 people selected to join this rotation program where we got to travel to different cities, work on different projects, and so my first rotation was actually at NBC in Los Angeles doing cloud engineering. So basically building out the backend AWS microservice architecture for all of Peacock and their content delivery that they had. So super, super fun. Learned a ton there as well, doing, taking big data sets, transcoding them, updating metadata, all that sort of stuff to deliver to the client. But that's kind of when I really fell into my love for Web3. So I talked a lot about my engineering side of myself, but I think the other side of me is my passion for music and sort of my involvement in music and how that's kind of formulated to where I think Bello, why it's such a passion of mine now. But in college, I also was around a lot of musicians and surrounded by a lot of people in the music industry. And so started doing some music management, started running a little local venue, doing all sorts of odd jobs. And then moving out to LA, I had a music collective where I had a podcast and also was like interviewing different people in the industry, very Web2 stuff though, and interviewed actually Jeremy Stern, the founder of Catalog, who told me all about music NFTs. And I was just like, oh my God, this is incredible.
Oh,
I see the
cool.
vision immediately. Like it made sense from the engineering side, from the music side. It clicked, right? So started learning more as much as possible. I started learning Solidity on the side, started doing some ETH Global hackathons, tried everything in my power to bring like crypto into NBC, which is a little too early for them at the time, but I did get the opportunity to pitch a patent to Universal Theme Park for this like in-park gamification of digital assets through like a Pokemon Go-esque experience. And they actually notified me as a few months ago that patent's in the process of getting developed and everything.
All
So
right.
it's it was fun to be able to have that opportunity to do that. But I kind of realized that my heart was in Web3 and I wanted to jump full time. So I left NBC, and that was like in 2021, I believe, and full time to join Web3, working for a company called Lunar Crush, which obviously, Adam, you've had Joe on the podcast, and obviously we'll allude to it. That's how we got the opportunity to meet each other as well. But yeah, so I worked there for about a year or so, a little over a year, doing full stack, front end, back end, um, all sorts of odd jobs, everything, wore many hats there. And it was amazing opportunity. And now I'm here working with you, Fly Guy
Hey.
Adam Levy.
Hey, so I'll try to keep up with that because you have a lot of experience underneath your belt. And one thing that when we initially met, Ellie, that I loved about your background is that you're very much a creator at heart, like you very much are. And I think it served as a great sort of advantage when we were thinking and putting our heads together to basically build out Bello and solve problems for creators, especially in Web3. Um, it works in your favor, or at least that's what they say
Mhm.
when you are the user and you understand the pain points. And I love that. And like you said, Joe has been on the podcast. Big fans of Lunar Crush. Joe is I guess like one of my indirect mentors as well, right? And sort of when I left my job working at a fund, uh, help sort of navigate my way through the thick and thin. So yeah, a lot of connections. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode specifically and why I put you on the lineup, and part of it was one, we introduced Bello to the world on August 5th, right? And then
Mhm.
on August 8th, we announced the new lineup of the season. And the entire season was focused around like Web3 social and demystifying data for Web3 creators. And I wanted to have you on so that we can sort of share the backstory of Bello and talk about why we've been spending so much time talking to users and why we've been spending a lot of time building Bello and how Bello came to existence. What do you think?
Yeah, I think for me, like the earliest conversations I sort of remember was after ETH Denver. Um, that was I think that was the first time we officially met. And I remember getting lunch and everything. And then you had this music NFT event, right, at ETH Denver, and you had Queen George perform there. And I remember during the show, which she killed it. It was incredible. I was dancing the whole time. It was amazing. Um, but I remember during that show there was like a QR code that you had all over the venue, the tables, and all this sort of stuff that people could scan to get an NFT. And I remember like that was such a unique experience. Like I had never been to an event where you connected on chain and off chain directly while being in person. And I think it was after that we had been just doing calls, like catching up with what we each other were working on. And that's when you had brought up this idea of like, well, there's no way that her as a creator who had people attending her events, like she knows nothing about those people, right? And she has no way to identify like what are these wallet addresses, like real people attended this event, but all she sees are these like numbers essentially. So I think that was for me the earliest time that I remember us discussing this, and it kind of was just a back and forth conversation. And I think you especially can obviously share more about like, and most people who listen to Mint probably have, or and if they haven't, should collect Adam's season participation pins, because I think that's a really revolutionary idea to be able to like track your listeners and your engagement season to season. And so I think the same way that Queen George had this sort of issue of like, okay, I've given away these free things to people just to like show that they're involved with me, right? You did that with your community season per season to season. And you also were faced with the same issue of like, well, I just have all these addresses. They're just a bunch of like numbers and letters put together. And there's no clear way to really understand it. And I believe that was like back in the springtime sometime, and we were
Yeah.
chatting about it. And it was definitely a problem that was very interesting for me to think about from the technology side.
So that episode, so we did that February 2022.
Yes.
And I remember that specifically because that was the initial idea for Bello, because we were, like you said, we were putting this event for Queen George, and we connected the offline with the online and vice versa. And it kind of hit me because we minted like 200 plus free tickets. And those tickets were minted by Ethereum, like OGs and like passionate ecosystem and community members. And then
Mm-hmm.
we're going to come watch her in person. And it was like a weird sort of like mix between tying together wallet addresses from online and then creating an experience for them offline in person. And Queen George and I were talking, and I asked her, I was like, how much do you actually know about your listeners on Spotify? And she's like, I know very little. I have like geographic data, so I can sort of see like if there's a lot of listeners in New York and Kansas, in LA, I know where to tour, right? But beyond that, it gets very weird. And I was like, wow, interesting. Now you have all these collectors, 200 plus, that collected your NFT, then came and watched you perform in person. You have all this interesting information that lies on chain that if you aggregate that data, you could probably learn something new about the people that come and watch you perform and create better experiences for them, right? And eventually find better ways to monetize in aligned ways. Um, and then I sort of like started thinking, I was like, wait, I have the same problem too. Like you said, like I give out all these pins, and it kind of hit me. I felt like if I knew more about who my collectors were, I could probably create better content for them and find better ways to monetize them. So that sort of led to the entire sort of spiral. So spot on. And if you listen to that episode, Ellie, you'll hear me talk because I published that episode like late February after ETH Denver finished. You hear me
Right.
talk about this problem like, you know nothing about your listeners, you know nothing about your collectors. Who's building this, right? And nobody was building it. And I guess that's sort of like
Hello.
the introduction. Like, let's go try to build this.
Right.
So where do we go next?
Yeah, so after that, we'd continue conversations back and forth. And at the time, I was, still full time working at Lunar Crush and pretty busy with just, passion projects and stuff on the side. And so said, Adam, why don't we take this idea? Why don't we go to ETH Amsterdam, work on it for a weekend, do a hackathon project, and see what we can make out of it. And of course, us both being travelers and people enjoy that, we packed up, went to Europe. It was just the two of us with this idea. And if anyone listening has ever done a hackathon, like you can hack by yourself, you can hack with another person, or you can have up to 5 people at least for ETH Globals and most of their events. So we found 2-3 other engineers and sat there for a weekend and basically recruited them around this vision. And I think I don't know, I just remember that the energy of being there and just staying up for like hours. Like I don't think I left that chair for like I don't know, like 12 hours straight, just sitting there coding and working with Juan, our other engineer that was helping us at the time, and just like really banging out sort of the vision for this. And I think one of the things that I remember the most too is that like during a hackathon, you obviously have a condensed amount of time, and when building a project, I feel like a lot of people, you have a million ideas, right? Like it's like, wow, here's this thing. Well, we could do this thing. We could do this thing. What if that this thing? But I think one of the beauties of a hackathon is just trying to be like, what is like the most condensed version, concise version of this idea, and how can you execute that? And I remember Adam, you really like keeping everyone like aligned with the vision and saying like, no, this is the problem we're solving. Let's run towards that. And so we did. We kept building, and I think within, I don't know, it was like 36 hours total. I forget the total amount, but I think I got like 2 hours of sleep and then we presented the next day at like 8 a.m. to the judges and ended up being one of the finalists at the ETH Global event in Amsterdam there.
Right.
So it was an amazing opportunity. It was the first time I ever spoke in front of like, I think there was like 1,000 something people there. It was
Something like that. It was
I
wild.
think
I remember I was like sleep deprived, and that, like my heart was beating because I drank too much caffeine, too much coffee, and I was trying to like just like control my heart rate by laying on a beanbag before we went up. And it was the first time I participated in a in-person hackathon. I did a few of them during COVID, and yeah, I guess like online from like FWB and
right.
whatnot. But I remember after we did our first sort of pitch at like 8 a.m. to the initial core judges, we were like, all right, that was cool, everybody. Have a good night. Like it was like 8:30 in the morning. Have a good
I
night.
remember almost going back to take a nap. Yeah.
Literally. And then I get this email, you guys are finalists, and I sent it in our group chat, and everybody started freaking out. We went and we did it, and it was one of the most memorable experiences for me. I still have that T-shirt from that hackathon, and
Oh yeah.
I learned so much, and we made a really great experience from it. And I think there was 165 projects that submitted. 12 or 13 were selected as finalists, and we were one of the 13.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
Yeah, I think from there it kind of just like formulated in at least my mind, and I'm sure yours a little bit as well, just like, oh, this is a real problem. Like, and I remember getting hit up by like tons of people who saw the presentation or people who came up to it afterwards, like talking about like how could they access, how can they work with it. And it was, yeah, just solidifying that like this is a need for the communities that we're all involved in. This is a need for Web3. And was just also so exciting to work on, and kind of being like hands in all pieces of it as an engineer. Like I was just so, enthralled to keep building. And yeah, I think from there it was the three of us from the hackathon, you, myself, and Juan, who had kept working on it, and it was something we realized that, like, okay, we want to get this to people as soon as possible. We want to get feedback on this as soon as possible. So it was the next, I don't even, I guess, like 2 months or so. We just were heads down building, and I remember our goal was like before NFT NYC to have like a beta version available that we can start taking in wait lists and just getting something out the door. And I just remember like every night staying up really late and like
Yeah.
working on it nonstop and all those sorts of things just to like start being able to talk about this at NFT NYC. And I do remember that was the first time for me that I actually got to show, I think it was Alec King. I sat down and we got to like look together at his dashboard. And I remember it was the first time I'd been spending so much time just like coding in, whatever room I was till all hours of night. And I think that's one thing as an engineer, you kind of forget that you're who you're building for sometimes, or
Mm,
it's like you're just doing all this code, all you see is lines of code that you forget that like, oh yeah, there are people that actually benefit from this. So I remember sitting down and like actually being able to show the dashboard and being like, wow, like see the reaction, see the impact that the information that we were able to derive had on an individual creator's life. So that to me was really impactful.
yeah. I recall when we did the presentation too, we used Snoop Dogg from Sound.xyz as like the premier example. And when we played it and we went on stage, we started playing like Snoop Dogg's track from Sound.xyz to sort of like warm up the stage. And building that entire MVP on what Etherscan APIs just to sort of show the proof of concept, and then getting all these DMs from Twitter, getting really great replies on the post and on my Instagram story, kind of realizing, wait, there is something over here. Let's keep picking at it and let's see where we can take it. And then, like you said, yeah, NFT NYC came around. We did a very soft, soft launch. And we basically ran around NFT NYC with QR codes on our phones, sneaking into these parties, trying to register for last minute to them for last minute, and just getting people to sign up. And anybody that would listen to us, we just share what we were up to at Bello. And I remember that's how we sort of built up our initial like beta test list
Mm-hmm.
prior to launching the product, the private beta version of the product, August 5th.
Right.
So, and Ellie, I'm trying to think back, and it's all blurry to me because from NFT NYC, which I think was like in June, July, to
Right.
August 5th, I'm trying to figure out like what went down during that month. Oh, you know what it was? At NFT NYC, we met this group called Dora Hacks,
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
Dora Hacks gave us our first grant essentially
Mm-hmm.
to bootstrap Bello because we weren't in like the fundraising phase, and we just needed a little bit of dough to keep up some infrastructure costs and to sort of like pay some outstanding fees that we had for maintaining the product. And Dora Hacks was the first group that saw our vision, and we met at that coffee shop. And Steve was
Right.
like, "We love it. We want to give you guys a grant, no strings attached." And then that really kind of like propelled us to the next phase to kind of prepare us for beta launch, private beta
Yeah,
launch.
I think it was, and going that route for us was super beneficial because we were at a position where we were kind of, at least at the time I was doing it part-time and you're still part-time doing it with Mint and etc. But we weren't at a stage where we were like, okay, let's like quit everything and run and do this right this second. But we wanted to prove that this thing was real and this thing like had users that needed to use it or wanted to use it, etc. And I think in my experience now, having like been able to create something and launch something out into the world without having to go seek out funds from like fundraising, doing all this sort of stuff initially, it does allow you to have like validity to yourself, validity for the user base, validity as co-founders to be able to say like, okay, this is something that we've built. Here are the X amount of people have used and have benefited from it, right? And I think that's something that, yeah, again, grateful to have that a little bit of funding that we got from grants early on, and we had a few other grants that we also received that helped
Yeah.
us sort of get to that stage. So definitely super beneficial.
Yeah. Shout out to Polygon and shout out to Lens Protocol, who
Woo woo.
also gave us grants and yeah, sort of like using that fuel to keep the fire alive. And what have we been up to the last few months? So it's November 4th today. We
Yeah.
did a private beta launch sort of Bello. What have we been up to since August 5th?
I mean, I think you can take that part a little bit and talk about I don't even know how many people you've sat one on one with, looked up their contract addresses, asked them about what they're working on, their pain points as creators, and done like tons of these one-on-one interviews and like direct beta questionnaires, I guess, with all these people. What was, I guess, for you, what was the biggest like takeaway, feedback, or thing that you saw either repeated or just pain points that you saw from creators?
Yeah, so I don't want to reveal too much because a lot of it is alpha for what's to come at Bello, but I feel like at this point I've talked to hundreds of creators, and
Hmm.
whether it's just me sort of like pre-querying their collections, and because I see that they have a drop coming up, and pre-querying their existing collectors and sending them screenshots of their in their Twitter DMs, be like, "Yo, I see you have a drop coming up. Check out this data that's really, really interesting on your existing collectors. Have you thought about reaching out to this community and maybe doing a Twitter space because you guys have collectors in common?" And like doing that repetitively for a bunch of creators,
Hmm.
or sort of like centering the new season of the Mint podcast around on-chain data and Web3 social, and driving traffic from there to having people sign up to Bello, right? And kind of like getting their feedback like that. Like I feel like it was like not an automated process. It felt like very one
Right.
on one, and then getting on calls, like 30 to 45-minute calls with all these users and pre-querying their dashboards and walking them through the insights and showing them the power of what it means to build an audience in Web3, right? And the value that not only do you get to create, but you get to keep and now unlock and get insights into, was very rewarding, and seeing sort of like the aha moments on people's faces as I went through their dashboards. For me, it was a very tiring, to be frank, like very tiring, but also very rewarding. As you can imagine, I do enjoy talking to people, hence the podcast. So, kind of like sitting in the back seat and playing the podcaster's role, of asking questions to users, but in a non-biased way to see how they feel about a specific like
Hmm.
early stage private beta MVP, uh, was an invigorating experience, to be honest. It's also like my first time. This is my second startup that I've attempted. The first one failed in crypto. This is sort of like the first one that I've been able to bring a product to market, right? And couldn't have done it without your help, and sort of like seeing what we built, and seeing the naked bare bones version of it, but seeing how it's validating some of people's problems, right? And validating a lot of our initial hypotheses
Right.
has been really cool to see.
Yeah, and I think from my standpoint, I've gotten to do a few of them, but I think just taking all the feedback, and you were great about note taking and all that sort of stuff, and just being able to say like, here are 100 people's opinions, whether it's new features that they're interested in or ways that they use the product themselves, like being then the engineering side and actually saying like, okay, well, here's how we prioritize or group together, because sometimes it's like people want this thing and this thing, but it's actually can all be accomplished by like one greater goal, I guess, so to speak. So that was really, I think, impactful for us for building Bello and deciding like, what's our roadmap look like, what are we actually focusing on. And I think for any person building a product, the most important thing is getting that direct like feedback loop with the people that are actually engaging with it or using it, because those are the people you're building with. And whether it's only 10 people to start or 100 people to start or 100,000 people, you're going to want to please, like, those are the people you're working to please, right? And so if you can please those 100,000 people, who's to say you can't please 100 million people, right? And I think that was really, yeah, really beneficial to have all that, and still have that right now, that when I have 20 things I can go and work on, because I know that these are going to be beneficial things, and keep building in that direction.
Yeah, the process for, I guess, for us as a duo was sort of like talking to all these users, getting their feedback, creating a complex Google spreadsheet of all these things that people requested, and all the tweaks and interesting things that they've sort of discovered that we didn't even think of. And then you and I huddling together and being like, all right, this is what people want. Let's create a roadmap around the requested features, and sort of like push it out one by one. And I'm curious from your perspective, Ellie, like what's it like building a product like Bello? Like I feel like I contributed to an extent to a lot of like the UX UI initially, but you've definitely taken that over at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear more of your perspective. Like, what does a day to day look like, and how is that building Bello? Right? Like, walk me
Yeah.
through that.
I think it's honestly been probably the most fun I've ever had working on a project. And that, I guess, kind of stems from the fact that what I talked about a little bit early on was just like my like music side of me, and that I had the engineering side, but I also like teaching. And I think as an individual, I thrive when I feel like I'm multifaceted and I can actually have my hands in different places. And so now being the sole technical side of Bello, my hands are everywhere. Like, I if there's no part of Bello that doesn't come through something that I've typed out or created. And I think that's a really rewarding feeling for one. And I think it's been interesting to be able to play everything from like, you've done a ton of like the Figma designs and all of that stuff, but now getting to even go in there and play with myself and do some of the graphic things, and then take that directly and translate it into the front end, and then build out the features in the back end that we need. And right now working on a huge infrastructure revamp. It's been challenging for sure. Like there's I'm learning stuff new every single day. But I have never been more excited to learn these things. And I think my experience in the past has kind of led me up to having all of these different skill sets in these different areas to be able to like maximize the output here. So my day to day changes almost every day. I have a to-do list and I organize it by like front end, back end, infra, and then like business. And so of course, like we're doing a ton for the actual development of the BD side of Bello. And so there's work that happens there, and all these different little features. It's usually for me either taking it by a feature level and saying, okay, like we want to add this new feature that someone else just talked about in one of the beta interviews, and it's like mapping out like, okay, where all the pieces go to actually complete that. And I think it's from my side also been doing tons of different research, talking to other intelligent people in the industry to sort of get feedback and make sure we're building this and building it in the right way. And so it's been for me a very rewarding experience.
Yeah. I wanna talk about sort of like what's happening on a macro level that kind of like justifies and motivates us to build a product and a service like Bello. And I'd love to get your take, but I want to hit it off with like a few sort of like data points, even
For sure.
fresh this week. It's again Friday, November 4th. Earlier this week, Instagram announced that they're basically building out an NFT marketplace and that it's essentially live for a select few creators that they've curated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reddit recently, I think like 2 weeks ago, introduced 3 million new crypto wallets on Polygon. Twitter is teasing in feed NFTs, right, for people to collect, despite them already integrating the PFP, the
Right.
Hexagon PFP, right? Web3 social is having a moment. Applications like Lens Protocol, right, are getting tons of users, tons of engagement. Other social applications are seeing interesting growth, different sub communities forming across the internet, realizing that Web3 users have different needs and wants, and maybe a new social experience is suited for them, right? There's a lot of sort of like big picture macro data points that I'm kind of like hooked onto as wow, this is like the light is right there, right? Like we need to follow the light, we need to pursue that, because if we do it right, there's an opportunity over here to help a lot of creators understand who their collectors are, and basically help them sort of like tap into the complex data that is otherwise being generated on chain and help them make sense of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think Instagram, we were chatting about it just before this, but I think it's definitely an interesting push that's happened, and curious to see how it plays out. I think it's definitely an it's not, most people who are native to Web3 don't think of Instagram. And I don't think those are going to be the people that are running to go join and buy NFTs there, right? I think what it does, in my opinion, is kind of open up the doorway to a lot of less native people to maybe onboard them, right? And it's actually funny. I even had, like, I'm sure, Adam, you get hit up all the time, people who are not that you've known from your past life of non crypto, who hit you up and they're like, hey, this thing about this NFT, and always asking questions like, what do I buy, blah blah blah, whatever. But I had a friend of mine hit me up, who was someone I went to high school with, and hit me up about their Coachella NFT. And they're like, hey, I went to Coachella, I have this NFT, but like what do I do with it, like where do I
Mm,
have it? And it was just like, to me it was like really cool to get that message, because they know me, I'm like a crypto person, whatever. um but Coachella doing that was just such an on ramp to somebody who would maybe probably never have even thought to have an NFT before, or felt that they were capable of like going through the steps to get one, to now have one and maybe do something next with that. And so in that sense, I'm personally an advocate for the expansion of education, the expansion of like diversifying and giving people a level playing field for understanding things. And I think, again, that's kind of why I'm super passionate about what we're building there. But um Yeah, I think to me it's a beneficial thing to have. I'm curious to see sort of how it plays out. Uh, I think I think it's all positive in my opinion, though.
Mm, yeah. When you think about the purpose and the underlying why, like the reason why something like Bello should exist in the world, right?
Right.
How do you rationalize that? How do you make sense of it? I have my own sort of like take, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good question. I think there's a few things for me personally, like I guess I was just talking about briefly. Historically in my life, like being an engineer, being a female engineer, there's a lack of diversity there. Joining being a female crypto engineer, there's even a far greater lack of diversity. Um, and I think just in general, for me, a passion has always been spreading education to underrepresented groups. And so in college, being able to teach computer science to different local high school students and all these sorts of things, or do workshops for middle school girls to teach coding, um, was always really rewarding. And in my sense, taking that to the music industry, it was working with these artists. Like when I started doing management, it was just because like I saw where I could help them. Like I thought that they were creatives and I wanted them to be able to just go out and make music and do the things that they were good at. And I was like, well, I can take care of all this other stuff. Like I can organize, I can make calls, I can schedule like bookings, etc. So let me do that. um and I think then even taking that now with like the past year, I've done so much like music Web3 consulting for artists. And something that I now get the opportunity to do is take the love for that I have for music, the love that I have for technology, and like and that love for education, and break it down to like really simple terms, right? Like if I can explain what Bitcoin is to my mom, like, you know, I think that that's an amazing thing. And I want to be able to do that for every artist or every individual that I talk to. Like, how can I break this down to the most simple way humanly possible? And I think a lot of times what you find with creators is that they're not super technical. And this is general, and I'm not saying for everybody, but like there are individuals that may look at like a chart of metrics or all these different things and get kind of like scared or uncertain of what it means, and not data mindseted people. And so I think a passion for me is being able to take something that is super complicated and break it down as simple as possible. And so when building Bello, that's like always kind of at the forefront of my mind, is like, how can we make something that's no code, that's simple to use, simple and easy to understand, and give people like direct, like even frankly English language of how they can interpret and use this information. And so I think for me that's definitely like a big why of what we're doing. And I think on the other side is more a little bit more macro in the sense of like what is data and what is people's rights to data. And I think that as individuals, we all have a right to our own data and we all have a right to access this information. And by utilizing blockchain, this information is out there and it's no longer siloed by the individual platforms that you decide to put your content on. So for instance, like if you're active on Spotify or Instagram or TikTok or any of these mega tech giants right now, they own your data and they house their data, that your data, and they decide when in which scenarios they show it to you, right? And so what we believe, I think both of you and I align on that, is that this is your information that you should have the public and all the access to. And so we're building tooling that gives you all of this information in all the diverse ways that you would see it beneficial for you to build. But yeah, that's kind of where I see it. Adam, what about yourself? Where do you sort of align with like, why is this a problem? What are you aiming to solve?
Yeah, the way I kind of understand it is as a creator myself who makes a living by being a creator, right? And in our case, like a crypto native, a Web3 native creator, um, I've sort of tasted the sugar of what it's like to build an audience and to monetize in Web3. And my bet, not only from me doing it myself, but also talking to a lot of other people, that to some extent, at some point, every creator is going to be crypto native, right? Crypto enabled, whether they know it or whether they don't, right? And the reason why they're going to do that is because I think the reason why I think that's going to happen, excuse me, is because I think the underlying tech of being able to build an audience on chain is super valuable. This 0 to 1 primitive of a follower equaling a collector, that's sort of how I see it, is
Mm-hmm.
so much more powerful in Web3 than it is in Web2, right? And the reason being is because if you remember 2018, TikTok started having its moment. what Kylie Jenner has now about like almost 400 million followers on Instagram. She tried pivoting to TikTok. I think she has a little bit over 20 million followers.
Mm.
So this concept of basically being able to bring your community and your fan base from one platform to another is very limited. But in Web3, you have this element of interoperability. So the innovation here is that instead of being the product of the platform, not being able to take your audience and be interoperable with your time and your efforts, right? In Web3, you could do that. You could do that very simply because you are the platform. We creators, we are the platform, and these projects, applications, these protocols, they're building around us. They want us to bring our collectors to their platforms, right?
Right.
So that's sort of like the innovation here. And that's sort of what I realized myself going through this experience, minting NFTs for free, just so I can build some type of collector base, right? I think that's sort of like the innovation here, right? And typically when you build an audience on a platform on like an Instagram, Snapchat, that data is siloed, it's gated, right? And the problem is like Google doesn't have the same data that Snapchat does or Instagram. And respectfully, it's made them sort of like the powerhouse that they are today. But in Web3, it works a little bit differently because
Mm-hmm.
creators build audiences interoperability. They mint NFTs on chain. That content is tokenized and not one person owns it, right? It's not like the product of a platform. It's the product of the creator, right? That's sort of
Exactly.
how I see it. And with that, there's a lot of data to understand and to unlock. So when you think about like what is that intelligence layer? What does that analytics look like for the creator economy? I want people to think about Bello. I want Bello to help people understand who their community of collectors are and how they can take action around that information to become better creators, help them grow their audience and make more money because that's all creators want. They just want to build an audience and monetize doing the things that they love, right? And I
Yeah.
think in Web3, there's no better place to do that. And a tool like Bello will become increasingly more important as we sort of like go down this crypto enabled world. Um,
Yeah, I think that that's you touched on a lot of really great points there, and I think it's especially like prevalent to look at like what do the top creators in Web 2 do to be successful, right? And so oftentimes, like if you're a big YouTuber or you're a big like top chart streamer on Spotify or all these different things, like you or most likely your team is not just like making decisions willy-nilly, frankly. And like sometimes there's a gut feeling, and I think that is part of being a creator, is being able to tap into that creative outlet and just try things. But in my opinion, as an engineer and the experience that I've been able to do working with creators, like data is important. Like whether some of the things you were talking about briefly earlier with like tour booking or shows, all this sort of stuff, it is obviously like a super easy demographic data to get. But when you can start looking at behaviors and start mapping those to sort of like what does the general profile of your audience look like, you can make better decisions around that. And that does exist in Web 2, and there's a lot of tooling that has sort of these tapping into some of your social media or your Spotify or streaming data, all these different things. But I think in Web 3 you need that, and you have actually better data in Web 3 because it is public. And I think as at Bello, and I think in general, the beauty of Web3 is that it's less about like, hey, this is this wallet address and I'm gonna go wallet watch them, right? We're more looking at like what is the profile of your collectors look like? What is the general behavior of them look like? Because that is the way that you can tap into make better content, right? A great example of this is an interview I think we did with like a music festival, Web 3 music festival, right? And they are, having people come and attend, but they're
yeah.
also, do you want to talk about it a little
No,
bit?
no, go ahead. No, I'm getting excited because this is one of my favorite stories. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a great example because it shows it on all spectrums. But you have people that come attend and you have people perform like that. That's basically a music festival, right? And how do you actually set that up? You usually have to have funding in some degree. So if you're a music festival and you're coming in and you're just trying to decide, okay, like number one, who is playing at this music festival? Well, if you're Web 3 native and you've purchased tickets that were NFTs, you now have all of these different addresses and you can plug them into Bello, or see based on on-chain information what other communities are these people a part of, what other NFTs are they purchasing. And especially if they're music Web 3 people, now you can see that here are the top of their like actual artists that they collect, and those are more likely than not going to be the people that you want to invite to come perform at your festival. And the fans are going to be excited about that, the like people who purchase, etc. And then you have the flip side of that is like I said earlier, like you have to fund this thing. You can look at these different projects, whether it's a big PFP project or it's a like L2 chain or these different protocols or different things. And you can say, hey, like, it seems like our communities overlap here. Like a lot of people that purchase my ticket as a music NFT festival also are active on your protocol. Well, maybe you should actually come and be a sponsor for us and we can drive even more traffic because
Hmm.
while it was only maybe like 15 or 20% of people that overlapped, like there's a good chance you could get or tap into that other like 80% of people, right? So I think that that's a really prime example of how this data can like be actively used to make a more productive output.
So it's a real world setting. Let's talk about digitally too. So as a content creator, right? Just talking about that one feature in Bello, like the assets in common, right? The relationship queries. One thing that I learned is that there's a lot of overlap between my collectors slash listeners and let's say Zora's protocol, right? And I noticed this distinctly because a lot of them were collecting different elements from Zora, and they were just like active on the protocol itself based off what was in their wallet. And at that time, when I discovered that, I'd never really created content with Zora prior. I
Mm-hmm.
think I only had like Latasha on, but we talked about Web3 social, right? We talked about Web3 music. And then fast forward a few months as I built a bigger audience and a bigger collector base, I then brought Eric Reppel on, and then I then brought Tyson Batistella on, the head of data and the CTO, respectively. And those episodes got 40 to 50% more downloads than a typical podcast episode, right? It was really cool because seeing that on-chain data gave me a glimpse into what my community liked, and I was able to take an action to deliver and create better things for them based off that, you know? Similarly, I saw a large overlap between like Aave holders and people who are also a multi-chain on Matic, holding Matic token, right? And Lens Protocol came in as a sponsor for season 6, and it was great because it was a very fruitful collaboration. We were able to drive a lot of new users to their protocol, and to their various applications, and it was just like a win-win, right? I made
Yeah.
money, they got new users, and then that kind of like that relationship extended even more now, right? And we're doing a bunch of different things. So that's like on content. Let's talk about music, right? Music is really cool because as a a Web3 native music artist, you can plug in your collector base into Bello and see what other music artists your collectors are collecting. You never know. There may be overlap between, let's say, Daniel Allen and Grady, for example. And I know they've done music together, but for assuming they haven't, right, and they see an overlap between their collectors, it may make sense for them to do a song together. A Web3 exclusive song doesn't maybe have to be distributed across Spotify and the DSPs, but if your collectors like you guys, create some content together, create some songs together if it makes sense, and make more revenue, right? And build and grow, cross collaborate and cross. I want to say cross contaminate, but cross collaborate your collectors. So there's all these like interesting things that you can do just by having very simple access to what's happening on chain.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious from your standpoint, you talked about, you know, you going into Mint season 6 and making your lineup and being able to use data to solve that problem. How has building Bello been for you as an individual who's solving a problem for themselves, right? Like you're creating this to solve your own needs and it also extends to other people's needs. How's that experience been for you?
It's really challenging because one thing that you consistently hear and that I read online and from people that I look up to, right, like other entrepreneurs and whatnot, there's like a stigma or like there's a saying of don't necessarily build for yourself. Like don't get too lost in the sauce and stay hooked onto your assumptions, right? Go validate them, right? But then there's the other balance of if you're the person that's having the problems, go solve them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe other people are facing the same problem. So I'm constantly trying to figure out the balance between both, right? And I don't want to assume too much and implement and spend time building out too many assumptions without validating them, but also taking into consideration as I am the user that I'm building for, and I need to recognize that. And a recent trend, or not a recent trend, but something that you see across like creator economy based crypto projects, right? They typically end up hiring a creator as their community manager so that the team of developers and the CEO can be as close knit to the pulse as possible for the user that they're building for, and also
Hmm.
that community member brings a breadth of other creators because they get the culture, they get the conversations, they get the lingo, they understand what creators need, and they can tap in through that user. We see this across Zora, we see this across Bonfire, we see this across Showtime, all great strategies, right? And also Lens Protocol, and there's a bunch of others.
Yeah.
So I think like our advantage too is like I am the creator, right? You're very much a creator yourself. I'm actively trying to build an audience. I'm actively trying to make money in the space as a creator using my creative love. And it's like finding the balance between the two. But
Right.
it's worked. I feel like it's worked more in my benefit than my detriment, and it's helped us get a lot of great conversations and a lot of progress on our private beta.
Yeah, and I think it's especially relevant that like the origin started from like you seeing it with Queen George, you seeing it with yourself, and then like us taking that, pretty rudimentary beta and just like talking to people nonstop and getting the validation from them and then also iterating on it and keep building on it. But I think you as a creator probably more than most people sit at an advantage for building a product like this in the sense that you're like you have your own opinion as like the creator that you are, like you're a podcaster, right? And you make content for people, and whether it's written or audio, etc. But you're also like actively talking to every type of creator all the time and every people in this industry all the time, and you see the pain points of their ecosystems and the different types of artists or musicians or big PFP projects or protocols or platforms, the list goes on, right? Like you've been able to sort of tap into all of that and focus back into like, okay, how does it feel as an individual, but also how does this look on like the grand scheme of things in Web3?
100%. And I hope to leverage that as we continue to sort of grow bello. I think I also want to touch upon Ellie, the element of privacy, because it's something that I very much care about, and it's something that our community cares about, right?
Yeah.
And one of the sort of the biggest criticisms that we get when we talk about bello is like, oh, don't you feel like could this be too intrusive, right? And I think number one, the way we've built bello is so that it doesn't track every single thing, right? If anything, it provides like aggregate analysis into a
Hmm.
certain uh, wallet selection. But I want to sort of touch upon like what does privacy really mean, and what's the history of privacy when it comes to the digital world, and as sort of being products of platforms in Web 2, and then coming into Web 3 and having the choice and the ability to opt in whether or not you want to dox yourself, right? You can
Yeah.
still create an anonymous address. You can still create a Proton email and live this anonymous digital life that you want to live without attaching an ENS and doxing yourself and posting the NFTs that you collect on Twitter, right? How do you feel about the element of privacy when it comes to Web 3? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think you started touching on a lot, and we kind of brought it up a little bit earlier, but yeah, we have the opportunity now with Web3 to define our role as an individual, right? And so previously, where you go on social media and you start plugging in your email and you start doing these different things, like people can start to identify you publicly. And in Web 2, I think it's almost like required to have some sort of like public identities that people can hold accountable. And I don't think accountability is necessarily a bad thing. Um, but I think we also have a right to be able to decide what information is put out there to the world. Like, I don't want to give people my address, although I'm nomadic and I don't have an address, but I don't want to give people my phone number. I guess that's a better example. Like just
Yeah.
any random person, because that's private information that I don't have any reason that I need to share with anybody. Right. And so I think with Web3, you're now providing people to have this either pseudo anonymous or totally anonymous profile, and if they so choose to, they have the opportunity to put into that as much as they want, right? And so in terms of like the pseudonymity, like you can have a creator or an individual collector who someone who just involved and just be a wallet address and be maybe completely anonymous, and they don't have any sort of ties to anything, and they just integrate with like DeFi protocols and do this stuff on their own. And then you can have the layer where maybe you purchase an ENS name, and maybe that ENS name is like Monkey Rocks 12456,
Love
right?
it.
Right, like, and you can go and live as Monkey Rocks, do something over there, right? And you can interact all these things, And maybe that's your identity now, is you have a monkey avatar, you do something with throwing rocks. I don't know.
Ellie, are you speaking your alter ego here? What's going on?
It may have been like my first email, something equivalent to that along the line. I'm like, am I
monkeyrocks119@gmail.com.
I think it was Yahoo at the time, actually.
Okay.
um, but you could essentially build that identity out and interact with that, and that could be who you are, right? And there are plenty of people we all probably can identify that fall into that role. And I think the beauty of that is that you can still map a behavior and a sort of like correlation between that activity of that pseudonymous individual to your collection as a creator. And I think that's where it is a beautiful thing to be able to say, like, okay, we're not focusing in and trying to find who this individual is. Largely, we want to show you what is like the aggregate behavior of individuals and the movement in this space, because that allows you to unlock a lot of different information about what steps to do next, right? And where you can actually take your community. Because like we said earlier, creators and like people building want two things. They either want to grow their community or they want to make money. And how can we actually use behavioral analysis and in that intelligence layer to give them actionable insights and information that they can do on it?
Yeah, 100%. Um, Ellie, I wanna talk about sort of what's next for Bello, and without revealing too much. And I know when we were talking before we started recording, we're like, all right, what do we say about what's next for Bello? But how do we also keep it very, very, very exclusive? I think our whole thing is like we want to under promise, over deliver, right? Like that's the goal. Um, I think I can say that we have a bunch of stuff sort of rolled lined up in our roadmap that we're going to be announcing soon. We've been very relatively quiet on Twitter intentionally because we've been doing a lot of behind the scenes sort of prep, talking to users, revamping the product, and making it ready for public launch very soon. But I guess anything you want to add that I didn't really mention to what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a few things. A lot is taking in again all that feedback from the individual people who are going to be the ones benefiting from Bello, whether it's a small time creator, a big brand, a platform, etc. All of these different kinds of tiers of what we still classify as creators in Web3, and building a roadmap that fits their needs. And so we have a bunch of different metrics and features we plan to be rolling out, as well as a big push on our actual internal infrastructure side. So in the near future, we'll also be expanding our team to bring in more engineers and to push product faster and do all these different things. So I think for us, it's going to be, when we launch publicly, having a very unique experience for the individuals who join and sort of their own personalized feel to it, and being able to actually take that and scale it out to as many people as possible.
Let's freaking go.
Woo!
Ellie, this was great. I'm glad we did this. It's been on the calendar for a minute now, but before I let you go, because I do this for every episode, where can we find you specifically? Where can we learn more about what you're doing? And shill it away.
I'm sitting in my room making a Bello PFP alternative.
Nice.
I spend so much time on Canva. I don't know if you listen to it, please go check out Bello's sites on Twitter. Our little mascot, I guess, is this little mushroom we call it Belly. And when I need like a break from coding, I go on Canva and I make like alternative beef belly. Anyway, maybe I'll post one out later today or something like that. But aside from that, you can find me on Twitter at Ellie Farrisi, ELLIE FARRISI. DM me on there if you have any questions. We also have our Telegram group, I think you can get to from our website, bello.lol. And you can join, and definitely, like, if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing, definitely sign up for our wait list, hop in our Telegram, and we'd love to have you chat about data and everything that we're building. So looking forward to talking to more of you guys soon.
Yeah, flex those earrings really quick. For those
Oh,
that are not watching, you have really cool mushroom earrings on. And Ellie, this was great. Till next time.
thank
Appreciate
you,
you.
Adam.